Tonight, we will wander gently through the life of Lady Margaret Beaufort. She was not a queen herself, yet she shaped the very foundation of the Tudor dynasty. Her story begins when she was still a child, just 12 years old, and soon after, she would bear the weight of England's future upon her shoulders. But before we arrive at Margaret herself, let us take a moment to imagine the world she was born into, the rhythms of daily life in 15th century England, where even the smallest details of a morning or a meal would feel both familiar and strange to us today. Imagine yourself in the year 1443. The air is cooler, quieter, and filled with the scents of earth, wood smoke, and candle wax. England is not yet the England you know. It is a patchwork of manors, market towns, and castles, ruled by noble families whose loyalties shift like the weather. Lady Margaret was born into such a family, and her daily life as a child was both sheltered and constrained. To understand her, we must first understand what it meant to be a noble girl in the 15th century. You might picture her mornings beginning not with alarm clocks, but with the slow lifting of the sun through narrow windows, filtered through glass that was often uneven and tinged with color. The rooms were cool, with rushes laid across the floor, strewn with herbs like lavender and rosemary to soften the air. Her clothing would be simple in childhood, a long gown of wool or linen, laced at the sides, always layered to ward off the chill of stone walls. Dressing was not a hurried affair. It was careful, deliberate, overseen by attendants whose job was to help maintain the dignity of a noble household. Meals, too, were markers of the rhythm of her life. Bread, cheese, and small beer in the morning. Later in the day, roasted meats, stews thickened with grains, and occasionally fruits preserved in honey. The meals were not hurried, but nor were they lavish feasts. Even in noble homes, food was a reminder of status, of order, and of obligation. Education for a girl like Margaret was not meant to prepare her for freedom, but for duty. She would have learned to read, often from devotional texts, for piety was considered one of the highest virtues of a noblewoman. She may have practiced embroidery, her fingers moving carefully across the fabric, stitching flowers, animals, or coats of arms. These were not idle pastimes, but skills expected of her role in society. And always, hovering in the background, there were the expectations. A noble girl's life was never fully her own. She was seen as a vessel of alliances, a way for families to bind their fortunes together. Even as she played in the gardens or walked in the cool shade of a cloister, her destiny was already being shaped by negotiations far beyond her understanding. The rhythm of Margaret's childhood would have felt quiet on the surface, yet filled with the unspoken weight of the future. Imagine her listening to the toll of church bells marking the hours, each note a gentle reminder of time passing, carrying her slowly, inevitably, toward a role she had not chosen. As we drift further into her world, let us move from this picture of daily life into the story of the girl herself, Margaret Beaufort, who at the tender age of 12 would be married, and by 13 would carry within her the heir to a dynasty that would change England forever. Lady Margaret Beaufort entered the world on the last day of May in the year 1443. She was born into privilege, but also into a time of uncertainty. England was caught in the turbulence of the Wars of the Roses, a struggle between rival branches of the royal family. From the moment of her birth, Margaret was not merely a child. She was a valuable piece in the great chess game of power. Her father, John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, died when she was still an infant. That loss, though she could not understand it, would shape her entire destiny. As an heiress, she inherited not only wealth but also responsibility, and with it came the interest of powerful men who saw in her future marriage an opportunity for influence. Margaret was just 12 years old when she was given in marriage to Edmund Tudor, the half-brother of King Henry VI. Imagine her, still a child, her world filled with embroidery hoops and devotional books, suddenly transferred into the household of a grown man, where she was no longer treated as a girl, but as a wife. Within a year, she was pregnant. At the age of 13, her body, still slight and unready, was burdened with the immense weight of motherhood. It was a time of fear and fragility, and though the chronicles do not tell us the intimate details, we can imagine the atmosphere. The hushed voices of attendants, the nervous prayers whispered in candlelight, the ever-present concern for both the child and the mother. The year was 1457 when Margaret gave birth. She was barely into her teenage years, and yet she brought forth a boy who would one day sit upon the throne of England. His name was Henry Tudor. Her husband, Edmund, never saw his son. He had died of illness months earlier, leaving Margaret a widow before her 13th year was even complete. The young mother was left with a fragile infant in her arms, and with that child came a future larger than either of them could have imagined. Despite her youth, Margaret displayed a resilience that would mark the rest of her life. She entrusted Henry's care to others when necessary, but never relinquished her role as his guiding force. Through years of shifting politics, battles, and betrayals, Margaret remained steady, devoted, and cautious. She lived much of her life at a quiet distance from the center of events, yet her hand was always there, subtly shaping her son's path. She aligned herself carefully with power when it was prudent, and withdrew when danger pressed too close. She endured the uncertainty of exile, the fear of rebellion, and the risk of losing everything. In time, her son Henry would claim victory at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, ending the Wars of the Roses and establishing the Tudor dynasty as King Henry VII. Margaret, by then no longer a child but a seasoned woman, stood as the matriarch of this new age. But even in triumph, her early years never left her. She remained deeply religious, dedicating her wealth to education and charity. She founded colleges at Cambridge, ensuring that her legacy was not only one of political power but also of learning and devotion. To think of Margaret Beaufort is to think of contrasts: a child forced into adulthood, yet a woman who mastered patience; a widow at 13, yet a mother whose son reshaped England; a figure of tragedy, yet also of endurance. As her story unfolds, we begin to see not only her own struggles but also the wider world of noblewomen in her age, the customs, the laws, and the quiet power they sometimes held. And so, with Margaret's life in mind, let us drift now into a broader view, into the culture and mysteries of arranged marriages and inheritance that defined her world. To better understand Margaret Beaufort's life, it is helpful to step back from her personal story and look at the customs and structures that shaped her world. For in 15th century England, noble marriages were never simply matters of love or choice. They were instruments of strategy, contracts bound not by affection but by land, lineage, and legacy. Imagine yourself for a moment in a medieval hall where such arrangements were discussed. The air is hushed, the light dimmed by flickering torches. Around a heavy oak table sit men of influence, parchment before them, their quills scratching as they weigh dowries, inheritance rights, and political allegiances. Somewhere, perhaps nearby, a girl of 12 or 13 waits quietly, her future being decided in words she is not asked to speak. For noble families, daughters were seen less as individuals and more as threads in a greater tapestry. A marriage could secure peace between rivals, or strengthen claims to land. With Margaret, the stakes were even higher. She carried Beaufort blood, a line tied closely to the royal family, though with questions of legitimacy lingering in the background. To marry her was to place a bet on the future of the crown itself. This world of arranged marriages was underpinned by inheritance laws that might seem curious to us today. Land was the true measure of wealth, and through careful contracts it could be tied, passed, or withheld across generations. Children, especially daughters, were the living keys to unlocking these inheritances. Their marriages determined the flow of property and power. Yet within this system, women like Margaret were not entirely powerless. Their voices may not have carried weight in council chambers, but their influence often moved in quieter spaces. In the private world of households and correspondence, a mother could guide a son, a wife could temper a husband's alliances, a widow could wield her wealth with remarkable independence. Margaret herself would later embody this quiet influence. She wrote letters on her son's behalf, she negotiated alliances carefully, and she moved with the subtle patience of one who understood that open force was not her domain. In this way, she reflects a broader truth, that women in her age often shaped history in shadows rather than in light. Archaeological glimpses of noble households offer us tangible reminders of this culture. Fragments of textiles embroidered by young women still survive, their threads faded but patterns clear. They remind us of long hours spent in careful work, each stitch a symbol of patience and discipline. Manuscripts owned by women, often prayer books or psalters, carry marginal notes, sometimes even tiny illustrations that suggest private reflection. These artifacts speak softly of a world where inner life and devotion provided both escape and purpose. Even the architecture of great houses tells the story. Chambers set aside for women, private gardens enclosed by walls, and separate chapels, all reveal a balance between seclusion and influence. A noblewoman might walk within her bounded space, yet her presence extended far beyond, shaping the future through children and through carefully maintained networks of kin. In Margaret's world, mystery also surrounded the very idea of destiny. Astrologers might be consulted, omens noted, dreams interpreted. The birth of a child like Henry Tudor would not have been seen in isolation but as part of a wider chain of fate, interwoven with the stars and the will of God. And so, when we reflect on Margaret Beaufort's arranged marriage and her early motherhood, we are reminded that her story was not unusual in its structure. What made it extraordinary was what followed. For many girls of her time, marriages were contracts, pregnancies were dangerous, and futures uncertain. Most faded quietly into the rhythm of their households. Yet Margaret endured, adapted, and shaped events in ways that few could have predicted. From this exploration of culture and custom, we may now gently turn to contrast. What of those who did not live as noble heirs? What was life like for the ordinary girls and women who shared the same century, but none of the same privilege? Up to this point, we have walked quietly through the halls of nobility, through Margaret Beaufort's household, where alliances were written into her very existence. Yet, beyond the stone walls of castles and manors, the majority of England lived a different rhythm of life. By contrasting Margaret's world with that of ordinary girls and women, we can see more clearly the extraordinary path she was placed upon. Imagine a village in the 15th century. The sound of roosters at dawn, the lowing of cattle, and the creak of wooden wheels along rutted paths. The homes are timber-framed, with walls of wattle and daub, their thatched roofs low and uneven. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of smoke from the central hearth, where meals are cooked in iron pots that hang over the flames. For the daughters of such households, life was filled with work from the earliest years. They learned to spin wool, to tend animals, to draw water from a well. Their childhoods were shorter than we might imagine, marked by the steady rhythm of labor. A girl of 13 in a village might already be considered old enough to contribute fully to the household economy. Marriage, too, came early, though in different forms than among the nobility. While noble unions were bound by contracts of power, village marriages were often more practical, based on shared work, survival, and sometimes affection. Dowries might be simple: a cow, a plot of land, or household goods. The decisions, while less grand than those in Margaret's world, carried equal weight for the families involved. Food told another story of contrast. While Margaret might have eaten from pewter dishes and sampled sweetmeats preserved in honey, common folk relied on simpler fare. Thick pottage made of grains and vegetables was the staple, accompanied by coarse bread and, when fortune allowed, a little meat or fish. Ale brewed at home was the everyday drink, safer than uncertain water supplies. Education, too, divided the classes. Margaret learned to read Latin prayers and to embroider delicate designs. In contrast, many village girls would never learn to read at all. Their knowledge was practical: how to bake bread in a clay oven, how to care for infants, how to recognize herbs for healing. It was a wisdom born of necessity rather than letters on a page. And yet, for both noble and common girls, life carried the same shadow of uncertainty. Illness, childbirth, and hardship could strike at any time. Even Margaret, with her wealth and attendants, faced the dangers of early pregnancy. The difference lay in survival. Where common families might lose daughters and mothers quietly, their stories seldom written down, the struggles of noble families echoed into chronicles and records, preserved because of their ties to power. There is also a contrast in freedom. A village girl might walk fields, tend sheep, or fetch water along open paths. Her labor bound her, but she was known in her community as herself. Margaret, by contrast, walked polished stone corridors, but always as an heir, a wife, a mother, rarely as simply Margaret. Her privilege was real, yet her choices were limited by forces greater than her. When we hold these images side by side, the village girl bent over a spinning wheel, and the young Margaret kneeling before a devotional book, we see both the great gulf and the quiet similarities. Both lived in a world without the comforts we take for granted. Both carried expectations, both bore burdens, both faced risks that modern medicine and freedoms would one day ease. It is in this contrast that Margaret's uniqueness stands out. From the same earth, the same sky, the same England, one girl became the mother of a dynasty, while countless others lived and died unknown. Together, they formed the hidden fabric of history, the noble and the common alike, woven into a tapestry that still shapes the world we live in. And so, as we leave behind the comparison of their lives, we can now return to Margaret's story as a whole, reflecting not only on her endurance but also on what her life means to us as we look back from the quiet comfort of the present. And so, in Margaret's childhood world of quiet chambers, devotional books, and carefully measured routines, we see the rhythm of a noble girl's early life. Calm, structured, and filled with expectation, her days prepared her not for freedom, but for duty. From this foundation, her biography unfolded. Married at 12, a mother at 13, and widowed soon after, Margaret's path was one of burden and resilience. Yet, within those trials, she revealed a strength that carried her through uncertainty, and in guiding her son Henry, she helped shape the future of England itself. When we step back to view the wider customs of her time, arranged marriages, inheritance laws, and the subtle power of noblewomen, we understand that Margaret was both unique and part of a larger pattern. The fragments of textiles, manuscripts, and household spaces remind us of the hidden influence women could wield, even when their lives seemed bound by duty. And when we contrast Margaret's noble existence with the simpler rhythms of common girls in village homes, her path becomes even more distinct. While many lived and labored anonymously, Margaret carried the hopes of dynasties. Yet both noble and common shared the same uncertainties of life, bound together by the fragility of their age. Together, these reflections leave us with a portrait not only of Lady Margaret Beaufort, but also of the world that shaped her, its structures, its burdens, and its quiet endurance. Now, as the story gently fades, we may also let our thoughts grow quiet. The stone halls, the candlelit chambers, the soft echoes of bells in the distance, all dissolve slowly into silence. You are here, in the comfort of your own time. Your bed is softer than any rush-strewn floor, the air around you clearer than smoke-filled rooms. The dangers and burdens that weighed so heavily on Margaret's young shoulders have no place here. Instead, you carry only the calm of reflection, the steady rhythm of history's passing, and the gentle reminder that the struggles of the past have given way to the peace of this moment. Rest now. Let the story drift away, like a candle extinguished at the end of a long night. Sleep deeply, and let history keep its quiet watch as you dream. Good night.